Susan flies in the face of every talentless monster who's become famous.
Susan Boyle's story has been told countless times, but very few people know that the woman who changed television forever also changed one of the toughest men in entertainment. Simon Cowell built his career by spotting talent with ruthless precision. He was famous for crushing dreams with a single sentence, rarely showing emotion no matter who stood in front of him. Yet there was one contestant who broke through every wall he had spent decades building. Even years later, whenever Susan Boyle's name came up, something in Simon's voice changed. The confidence softened, the sharp edge disappeared, and the memories seemed impossible for him to hide. It wasn't simply because she had an unforgettable audition. It was because he witnessed firsthand the extraordinary rise, heartbreaking struggles, and incredible resilience of a woman who reminded the world that greatness can appear where nobody expects it. To understand why Susan's journey affected Simon so deeply, you have to go back to one unforgettable evening in April 2009. Britain's Got Talent had already become famous for discovering singers, dancers, and performers from across the United Kingdom. By then, Simon believed he had seen every type of contestant imaginable. After years of judging competitions around the world, he could often predict how an audition would unfold within seconds of someone walking onto the stage. Experience had made him confident, but it had also made him skeptical. Then Susan Boyle appeared. She wasn't introduced as a celebrity or an experienced performer. She was a 47-year-old woman from the quiet Scottish village of Blackburn who had spent most of her life caring for her elderly mother while quietly dreaming of becoming a professional singer. She looked nervous, spoke with a thick Scottish accent, and carried herself with the awkwardness of someone completely unfamiliar with television cameras. As she walked toward the microphone, laughter rippled through parts of the audience. Some people exchanged amused glances. Others assumed this would become another awkward audition destined to be forgotten before the next commercial break. Even the judges appeared uncertain. Simon leaned back in his chair with the expression viewers had come to recognize so well. It was the look of someone already preparing polite disappointment. Then everything changed. The orchestra began playing the opening notes of I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables. The instant Susan started singing, the room froze. The smiles disappeared. Conversations stopped. The audience that had doubted her only moments earlier erupted into applause before she had even reached the chorus. Television cameras captured something almost as remarkable as Susan's voice. They caught Simon Cowell's face. The disbelief was unmistakable. His crossed arms slowly relaxed. The skeptical expression disappeared. Instead of the judge evaluating another contestant, viewers saw someone experiencing genuine surprise. It was one of the rare moments when Simon completely forgot about the cameras. By the time Susan reached the song's emotional climax, the audience was standing. The judges applauded enthusiastically, and Simon later admitted that he had completely misjudged her before she sang. For a man known for unwavering confidence in his instincts, admitting that kind of mistake was almost unheard of. That single audition became more than a viral television moment. Within days, millions of people around the world had watched the performance online. News organizations across Europe, America, Asia, and Australia reported on the unlikely singer from Scotland who had stunned the judges. Social media exploded with reactions, and before long, the audition became one of the most watched clips in internet history. People weren't just fascinated by Susan's extraordinary voice. They were captivated by the lesson behind it. For years, audiences had been conditioned to expect talent to come wrapped in youth, glamour, and polished confidence. Susan Boyle challenged every one of those assumptions in less than 7 minutes. She reminded millions that appearances reveal very little about true ability. Simon understood this better than almost anyone. Years later, he continued describing Susan's audition as one of the greatest surprises of his entire career. Considering he had launched the careers of countless successful artists, that statement carried enormous significance. But while the world celebrated the fairy tale success, very few people understood what was happening behind the scenes. Susan had gone from living a quiet, private life to becoming one of the most recognizable women on the planet almost overnight. The attention never stopped. Television crews followed her everywhere. Photographers camped outside her home. Reporters searched for every possible detail about her childhood, her family, her friendships, and even her personal habits. Every interview became international news. Every nervous comment generated headlines. For someone who had spent decades living peacefully in a small Scottish community, the sudden fame became overwhelming. The pressure intensified throughout Britain's Got Talent. Susan continued delivering remarkable performances, but the constant media attention was beginning to take a visible toll. Friends later recalled how exhausted she appeared as the competition progressed. Sleep became difficult. Privacy disappeared almost completely. Then came the finale. Despite another emotional performance, Susan finished in second place behind the dance group Diversity. The result shocked many viewers who had expected her to win comfortably. Losing the competition wasn't the real tragedy. The weeks of relentless pressure had already pushed Susan beyond her limits. Shortly after the finale, she was admitted to a private hospital suffering from extreme exhaustion and stress-related health problems. Around the world, millions who had celebrated her success suddenly learned that the woman whose voice had inspired them was quietly fighting one of the hardest battles of her life. For Simon Cowell, this marked the beginning of a much deeper understanding of what sudden fame could do to someone. Over the following years, he spoke more openly than ever before about the entertainment industry's responsibility toward contestants. He acknowledged that creating stars wasn't enough. The people behind those remarkable moments also needed protection, guidance, and support once the cameras stopped rolling. Those comments surprised many people who knew Simon only as television's toughest judge. His public image had always been built around confidence and criticism. Now there was something different. There was reflection. Susan's experience forced difficult questions that reality television had rarely confronted. Was discovering extraordinary talent enough if the people behind that talent weren't prepared for worldwide fame? Could producers celebrate life-changing moments while ignoring the emotional consequences that followed? Simon never claimed to have all the answers, but Susan's story clearly stayed with him. Fortunately, her career did not end with Britain's Got Talent. Only months later, she released her debut album, I Dreamed a Dream. It became one of the fastest-selling debut albums in history, proving that her audition had not been a lucky moment but the beginning of a genuine musical career. Millions of albums were sold across the globe, and audiences who first discovered her through television continued supporting her long after the competition ended. For Susan, the success represented something much bigger than commercial achievement. She became living proof that dreams don't expire because of age. People who had been told they were too old, too ordinary, or too late suddenly found hope in her journey. Letters poured in from fans describing how Susan had inspired them to chase opportunities they had almost abandoned forever. Simon often spoke proudly about those accomplishments. Unlike many reality show contestants whose careers faded within months, Susan continued building an international following through determination, humility, and remarkable consistency. Each new success seemed to reinforce the belief Simon had formed that unforgettable night in 2009, that she wasn't simply another contestant. She was someone truly unique. But just when it seemed Susan had overcome the greatest challenges of her life, even more difficult obstacles were waiting around the corner. Her health would soon be tested in ways that no amount of fame or success could prepare her for, and Simon Cowell would once again watch someone he deeply admired fight through another heartbreaking chapter. One that would eventually leave him more emotional than anyone had ever seen before. Susan's greatest strength had never been fame. It had always been resilience. Long before millions knew her name, she had already spent decades overcoming loneliness, disappointment, and the feeling that the world simply didn't notice her. That quiet determination became even more important after the whirlwind success of Britain's Got Talent, because life after global stardom turned out to be far more complicated than anyone imagined. Although her albums topped charts around the world and concerts sold out across multiple countries, Susan never seemed interested in living the extravagant celebrity lifestyle that many expected. Instead, she stayed remarkably connected to her roots. She continued living in her hometown of Blackburn, often saying that staying close to familiar surroundings helped her remain grounded despite everything that had happened. That decision surprised many people. Most international stars moved into luxurious mansions surrounded by security and privacy. Susan chose something completely different. She preferred the comfort of familiar neighbors, familiar streets, and the ordinary routines that had shaped her life long before cameras entered it. Simon Cowell admired that quality. Over the years, whenever he discussed Susan in interviews, there was a noticeable respect in his voice. He never spoke about her as simply another success story from one of his television shows. Instead, he described her as someone who had reminded the entire entertainment industry that extraordinary talent doesn't always arrive in glamorous packaging. But Susan's personal challenges were far from over. In 2013, she revealed that she had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. For much of her childhood and adult life, she had struggled to understand why she often felt different from those around her. The diagnosis finally provided answers to questions she had carried for decades. Rather than hiding the news, Susan spoke openly about it. She hoped that sharing her experience would encourage greater understanding of autism and remind others that a diagnosis does not define a person's abilities. Once again, she became an inspiration, not only through music but through her honesty. Later that same period, she also learned she had type 2 diabetes, requiring major lifestyle changes. Then came another heartbreaking loss. Her sister, one of her strongest supporters throughout life, passed away after battling cancer. The grief affected Susan deeply. For a time, she stepped away from public appearances, choosing to heal privately rather than remain constantly in the spotlight. As if those challenges weren't enough, the COVID-19 pandemic brought her career to another standstill. Concerts were canceled, performances disappeared, and like millions of people around the world, Susan found herself isolated from the audiences who had supported her for years. Yet perhaps the greatest challenge arrived in 2022. Susan suffered a minor stroke. For any performer, a serious health scare is frightening. But for a singer whose entire career depended on her voice, the news was devastating. Fans immediately feared the worst. Would she ever sing again? Had the world already heard her final performance? Recovery wasn't easy. Susan later explained that she underwent months of therapy and rehabilitation, determined to regain what the stroke had threatened to take away. Progress came slowly. There were difficult days filled with uncertainty, frustration, and doubt. Many people in her position might have accepted retirement. Susan wasn't ready to give up. Her determination eventually led to one of the most emotional moments of her entire career. More than 14 years. After stunning the judges with I Dreamed a Dream, she returned to the Britain's Got Talent stage, the very place where everything had begun. Before singing, she shared something deeply personal with the audience. She spoke honestly about suffering the stroke and about how hard she had worked to return. There was no attempt to dramatize her struggle. She simply told the truth. Then the music started. As Susan sang once again alongside the cast of Les Miserables, it became immediately clear why audiences had fallen in love with her all those years earlier. Her voice carried not only beautiful notes but the weight of every obstacle she had overcome. It wasn't just a performance, it was a victory. For viewers watching around the world, the moment felt like history repeating itself. Only this time, the applause wasn't for an unknown woman proving herself. It was for a survivor. Simon Cowell watched with visible admiration. Years earlier, he had witnessed Susan's extraordinary beginning. Now he was watching her remarkable comeback after one of the hardest chapters of her life. People close to Simon have often noted that conversations about Susan affect him differently than discussions about almost any other contestant. While he has helped launch countless successful careers, Susan occupies a unique place in his memories because her story challenged assumptions he had carried throughout much of his professional life. He has openly admitted that he judged her too quickly during that first audition. That confession may sound simple, but for someone whose career was built on judging people, it carries enormous significance. Susan reminded him that instinct alone isn't always enough. Sometimes greatness arrives in forms nobody expects. Over time, Simon also became increasingly vocal about the responsibility television producers have toward contestants after their lives change overnight. Susan's experience highlighted how overwhelming sudden fame could become, especially for people who had never imagined living under constant public attention. Her journey encouraged broader conversations about contestant welfare, mental health support, and the emotional pressures created by reality television. While no system is perfect, many believe those conversations became far more serious because of what Susan endured. That may be one of her most important legacies. Her influence reaches far beyond record sales or television ratings. She challenged stereotypes about age. She challenged assumptions based on appearance. She encouraged greater understanding of autism. She reminded millions that kindness matters just as much as talent. And perhaps most importantly, she gave hope to people who believed life had already passed them by. Every year, countless viewers still return to that original audition. Not because they're curious about who won the competition. Not because they're interested in another viral television clip. They return because, for a few unforgettable minutes, they witness something incredibly rare. They watch an entire audience realize how wrong first impressions can be. They watch a skeptical judge become genuinely speechless. And they watch one ordinary woman inspire the entire world. That is why Simon Cowell continues speaking about Susan Boyle with such genuine admiration. It isn't simply nostalgia. It's gratitude. Out of every performer who has stood on one of his stages, Susan gave him something no amount of success, ratings, or record deals ever could. She reminded him why discovering talent mattered in the first place. Behind every audition is a human story. Behind every voice is a lifetime of struggles no audience can immediately see. Susan Boyle's journey became proof that extraordinary people often spend years being overlooked before finally receiving their moment. When people say Simon Cowell became emotional reflecting on Susan's story, it isn't because her career is over or because her remarkable journey has ended. It's because she represents a once-in-a-generation moment that transformed not only the life of one singer, but also the perspective of one of television's toughest judges. More than 15 years after that unforgettable audition, Susan Boyle remains one of the greatest success stories in entertainment history. She didn't just silence an audience filled with doubt. She challenged the world's assumptions about talent, age, appearance, and possibility. And for Simon Cowell, that lesson has never faded. The woman who walked onto the stage wearing a simple gold dress left carrying something far more valuable than applause. She left behind a legacy that continues inspiring millions of people to believe that it's never too late, never too unlikely, and never impossible to chase a dream. Some auditions create stars. Susan Boyle's created history, and history is exactly why neither Simon Cowell nor the world will ever forget her.